we all know a conference or a CMA on obstetrics is not complete without talking about preeclampsia or eclampsia. And to discuss on this, we have two eminent moderators with vast experience in the field of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy. That is Professor Dr. N.S. Sridevi from Pushpagiri Hospital, Tiruvalla. Madam is a retired professor from Calicut Medical College. And Madam has got vast interest in the field of hypertensive disorders. Madam is a past president of Kerala Federation of Obstetric Society also. The other moderator is Professor Kumari. Madam is from Government Medical College, Kottayam. She is the past president of Kottayam OG Society and secretary of Kottayam OG Society. A speaker in various conferences and has a number of publications to her credit. And to speak about this, we have an international faculty, Dr. Suresh Kumar Subramaniam from Malaysia. He is working as a consultant in Columbia Asia Hospital in Malaysia and also is a senior adjunct for obstetric life-saving skills. Over to you, Suresh sir, and the moderators. The whole platform is yours. Suresh sir.
Yeah, hi, good
morning.
Good afternoon. I mean, I think it's still morning in India. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to, share my limited knowledge in eclampsia with all of you who are like, really vastly, knowledge, and my professors are still watching me during this presentation. So anyways, the outline is we are going to revisit concepts, pathophysiology, classification of preeclampsia, eclampsia, and recommendation for prevention, modern management of eclampsia. So if you look at it, the word eclampsia, it was derived from the Greek word eclampsia. That means, it is a new onset of grand mal seizure. One second. Sorry. Okay, a grand mal seizure activity during pregnancy or postpartum in a woman with signs and symptoms of preeclampsia. In almost 80% of the cases, it is preceded by severe preeclampsia. So most of the time, the onset of fits, it is divided into antepartum, intrapartum, and postpartum, in which 50% occurs during antepartum, and 30% during intrapartum, and another 20% can be divided further into early as well as late postpartum. So the stages of eclampsia is divided into premonitory stage, tonic stage, clonic stage, and coma stage. So the premonitory stage is the most important stage in which we need to identify and diagnose so that we can initiate the treatment as soon as possible. This lasts around 10 to 20 seconds, in which if we miss that, the subsequent is, a disaster, which is the tonic stage, followed by a clonic stage, which lasts most of the time around 1 to 2 minutes, and then they'll go into post-ictal drowsiness or comatose stage. Most of the time it lasts around 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes in severe cases it can go up to hours. So the revised ISS-HP classification for hypertensive disorders in pregnancy is divided into chronic hypertension, gestational hypertension, preeclampsia or superimposed chronic hypertension, and something new, which is the white coat hypertension. So as we know, hypertension is defined as systolic BP of more than 140/90 and diastolic BP of more than 90, and it should be at least 4 to 6 hours apart in a calibrated blood pressure monitor as well as a trained professional. So during pregnancy, we divide the hypertension to less than 20 weeks and hypertension starting more than 20 weeks. Less than 20 weeks is the category for chronic or secondary hypertension, white coat hypertension or masked hypertension. And after 20 weeks, it's gestational or preeclampsia. So what is white coat hypertension? So most of the time, some of the patients who do come to our clinic, we examine their BP, the BP will be more than 140/90. Are we going to classify them as hypertensive? It is a very, critical situation. So what we have come up with is, to do a ambulatory BP monitoring. So when they are at home, when they monitor the BP, if the BP is less than 130/80, and if the sleep BP is less than 115/70, then we will diagnose them as white coat hypertension. However, if it is high at home, it's more than 130/80, then they are diagnosed as chronic hypertension. The reason why we need to diagnose white coat hypertension, because they have risk of gestational hypertension almost 50%. A recent study which just came out in May under Hypertension Journal on maternal and perinatal outcome of white coat hypertension during pregnancy. It was a systemic review and meta-analysis, noted that pregnant women with white coat hypertension have risk of preeclampsia almost 5-fold, as well as small for gestational age, birth, as well as preterm delivery by 2 to 3-folds. So the revised definition of preeclampsia, hypertension with one of the following conditions, either proteinuria in different methods of quantifying with protein creatinine ratio of 0.3 or higher, urine dipstick of more than 1, or 24-hour urine protein more than 300 milligrams per 24 hours. The gold standard is the 24-hour urine protein. And also uteroplacental dysfunction with fetal growth restriction and modalities like abnormal uterine artery or uterine artery Doppler. And also maternal organ dysfunction, in which the renal, hepatic, neurological, and hematological impairment. Any one of it is considered as preeclampsia. So as we know about the pathophysiology, it starts from early and then it goes to late during late term. So it is failure of the secondary trophoblastic invasion followed by failure of dilatation of maternal spiral artery that leads to uteroplacental insufficiency, leading to placental bed ischemia, and that releases chemical mediators in which causes the maternal endothelial dysfunction, which is further progress to maternal syndrome of preeclampsia. So this is the proposed pathways in how this chemical, or immunological factors which cause, further damage to the endothelial lining and causing the outcome of the mother. And the common and uncommon presentation prior to seizure, okay, most of the time they'll present with headache, hyperactive reflexes, marked proteinuria, generalized edema, visual disturbances, and right upper quadrant pain or epigastric pain. This is all due to the edema which is happening at, in every part of the system. However, some of them do present with lack of edema, absence of proteinuria, and normal reflexes. In our clinical practice, what we have noticed is some of the patients will not have any of these symptoms. They will present to us with symptoms of unable to sleep, irritability. Some of them will have abnormal behavior. Then it will be followed by an eclamptic fit. So these are the common findings, what we will see in our CT findings, either post-eclamptic or sometimes when they're having severe headache, we do send them for some CT scans and we'll find out that, these are the changes what we see, like cerebral edema, diffuse white matter, low density areas, and also most commonly they will diagnose them as PRES. So in terms of predicting and preventing preeclampsia, there are several steps in which one, we start off with clinical screening where we will stratify them based on their risk, and then sonographic markers, serum biomarkers, combination of factors, primary prevention and secondary prevention. So this is the flow for preeclampsia. So in Clinical screening by risk factors, we categorize them as high risk factors, moderate risk factors. So at least of one of this in the high risk factor or two or more of these moderate risk factors, we tend to initiate aspirin 150 milligram from 12 weeks gestation or less than 16 weeks. So these are the pre-morbid conditions in which we do initiate aspirin for our patients here. So in composite predictive factors, clinical sonography and soluble biomarkers, what we have noted is it has significantly in terms of diagnosis or predicting the probability of getting early preeclampsia, in which it changes the way we monitor the patients and prepare them for their delivery. Is prevention possible? Yes, by recommending patients with initiating them with aspirin, at least if they have one high risk factor or two moderate risk factors, which we start off before 16 weeks of gestation, and also initiating them with calcium, which is high dose supplementation, almost 1.5 grams per day in pregnant women with low dietary calcium intake. It only reduces the risk of preeclampsia, severe gestational hypertension, and also severe preeclamptic complication index. It is only for those who are on low dietary calcium intake, it makes a difference. And also, they're advocating exercise in pregnant women at least 3 days per week for an average of 50 minutes using a combination of aerobic exercise, strength, and flexibility training. And this has been associated with less weight gain and reduce the incidence of hypertensive disorders. In terms of effects of pregnancy, there were no significant adverse effects. So basically, the principle of management for eclampsia is to identify, stabilize the patient, and protect the airway. So every hospital will have their own protocols in terms of code blue or red alert system. So the main thing is, once we stabilize the patient, most of the time we'll need a multidisciplinary approach with the anesthetic support. We will initiate them with anticonvulsants and antihypertensives. And depending on the gestational age, consider for fetal lung maturation corticosteroids, as well as plan the delivery as soon as possible, as we know the main issue is from the placenta. So referral to critical care depending on the severity of the problem, and also the management of the patient in postnatal period, and also before the transfer to the community care. So what is the role of magnesium sulfate? As we know, in the multinational collaborative eclampsia trial, they have quoted that magnesium sulfate is the treatment of choice for eclampsia, in which it reduces the risk of recurrent seizure in eclamptic women by 52% when compared to diazepam, as well as 67% compared to phenytoin. So it was a landmark paper, and also we can use this for prophylaxis in preeclamptic women. And the total magnesium serum concentration advocated for the treatment of eclamptic convulsion is around 3.5 to 7 milli equivalent per liter, which can be obtained with IM or IV loading dose followed by maintenance. So this is the effect of magnesium sulfate. We'll be wondering where all, how does magnesium sulfate is being the most effective. So it affects on the cerebral edema and the blood-brain barrier, in which it stabilizes the membrane, as well as the vascular effect of magnesium sulfate causes, relaxation and vasodilatation. So it does reduce the vascular resistance, as well as increases the seizure threshold at the level of the neuron. So combination of all these three is the one which stabilizes the membrane, the brain. So in terms of magnesium sulfate, there's multiple regimens depending on your hospital protocol. There's I'm just giving you an examples. Continuous IV regimen, Pitchart regimen, CBI, and Suspan regimen. So essentially, in IV route, the loading dose should be 4 grams, followed by maintenance dose of 1 gram per hour. If let's say we have no access for intravenous, then intramuscularly, the loading dose will be 10 grams in each buttocks, maintenance of 5 grams every 4 hourly. And of course, there's in terms of IV route, there'll be a dilutional, whereas in IM route, there's no dilutional. The concentration will be at around 50%. So these are some examples of the continuous IV regime in terms of, and also Pitchart and the location where the injection should be given. This is CBI regime and also Suspan. When they did a comparison of all these regimen, nothing was superior to another. It all depends on your hospital protocol and what is the available things in your hospital. And treatment is usually continued for 24 hours after delivery or after the last convulsion, and it is not 24 hours after starting magnesium sulfate. So the most important thing in terms of initiating a magnesium sulfate therapy is the monitoring, because magnesium sulfate is a toxic drug. So there should be a magnesium sulfate chart which contains vital sign monitoring, BP, pulse rate hourly, and the deep tendon reflexes should be monitored hourly. Urine output should be maintained more than 30 cc per hour or 100 cc in 4 hours, and serum magnesium and calcium level every 12 hourly, and also continuous cardiac monitoring to look for any prolonged PR interval and wide QRS complex. So if we are looking at the therapeutic range, it should be around 1.7 to 3.5 millimoles or 4 to 7 milligrams per deciliter. So if at all we notice any of this, respiratory depression or hypotension, areflexia or arrhythmia, or if the serum magnesium level of more than 3.5, then we should immediately stop the infusion of magnesium sulfate and diagnose magnesium toxicity. So the antidote for magnesium toxicity will be calcium gluconate, which is 1 gram. Most of the time it comes as 10 mils of 10% solution given slow IV bolus over 10 minutes. So the idea is all these things should be available before even we initiate magnesium sulfate. So in terms of post-acclimatic fit after initiating magnesium sulfate, most of the time the blood pressure has to be controlled. So it depends on what is available. The first line would be labetalol followed by hydralazine, and if patient is can tolerate orally, then we may use nifedipine. Use of sodium nitroprusside is very rare, but if at all a need arises, then we have to be very careful in terms of fetal cyanide poisoning. So if recurrent seizures happen, so a second bolus of magnesium sulfate should be given over 10 to 15 minutes. The dosage depends on the weight. If the weight is less than 70 kg, 2 grams. If it's more, then you have to repeat the whole loading dose of 4 grams again. Check the deep tendon reflex and respiratory rate before repeating the dose. If seizure continues, then despite after the bolus dose, then we may need to protect the airway by intubation and consider using other drugs like diazepam, and we need to assess if there's any intracerebral bleeding. Okay, delivery, most of the time we want to speed up the delivery, and I would prefer to say the faster way of delivering is through cesarean section, and provided her biochemical parameters were all within normal and the mother is stabilized, because induction of labor is going to take more time, and we're going to cause more biochemical derangement, in which it can cause her more of a maternal morbidity, and sometimes it could lead to mortality. In terms of postpartum care, post-delivery, the mother still has the risk of getting a repeated eclamptic fit, in which she needs to be nursed at the high dependency unit, at least at level 1 or level 2. And we advise and follow up and transfer to community care is based on whatever medication we are given to the patient in terms of breastfeeding, and also the risk of recurrence in future pregnancy and the patient's lifetime cardiovascular risk. So if you look at the likelihood of recurrence of hypertensive disorders in pregnancy by NICE guidelines 2020, if she had preeclampsia, if the birth was at 28 to 34 weeks, approximately 1 in 3 women will have a recurrent risk, and if it's from 34 to 37 weeks, it'll be almost 23%, 1 in 4 women will have a recurrent risk. So this is what we need to counsel them before we discharge them. And also in terms of cardiovascular risk in women who had hypertensive disorders in pregnancy, the risk increase almost 1.5 to 3 times, almost 2 to 3-fold increase in terms of major cardiovascular event, cardiovascular mortality, and also stroke. So these are the latest things that what we need to counsel our patients. And in every unit, what we would suggest is they should have a eclampsia kit in which they can put in all the necessary equipments, so that if any emergency arises, they could just take the kit, and every equipment will be in the kit so that they can manage it. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk, and thank you very much.
Hello.
Yes, madam, we can hear you. Hello, madam. Thank you, Dr. Suresh.
Hello.
Yes, madam.
Thank you.
Yes, madam.
Hello. I'm Dr. Beena Kumari. Sir, it was an excellent talk. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, madam. Please continue.
Can you hear me?
Please continue.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay. Now they have started my video. Thank you so much. It was an excellent talk, Dr. Suresh Kumar.
Thank you.
We have so many patients having eclampsia here, but of late the number of eclampsias has become less, because we are more in favor of starting prophylactic therapy to prevent eclampsia, rather than having eclampsia, and prevention is more important. So we give Maxel for prevention whenever they have this symptoms of imminent eclampsia, and so on, and antihypertensive therapy. And as our Kerala Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology has been recommended, we use actually a low dose regimen of 4 gram with 4 gram IV and 4 gram IM, followed by an IV dose, maintenance dose of 1 gram per hour. And the same dose we give for prophylactic therapy also whenever she comes with high blood pressure or impending symptoms. And we stress upon the IV labetalol therapy also for control of hypertension. Sridevi, madam?
Yes. Yes.
Madam, your comments, please.
Dr. Suresh, it was an excellent presentation, very crisp, and all valid points have been highlighted. And we follow the Kerala Federation guidelines.
Madam,
As
I cannot see you, madam.
pardon?
Madam, your video. Your face is not seen.
Yes, now we
Okay.
can. Okay, fine.
And I have already mentioned about the presentation. Then the one thing what Dr. Suresh Kumar has highlighted, I'm very much interested because following the exercise, whenever our women we detect pregnancy, they won't go for any exercise, even if we advise. Second point is, once we diagnose hypertension, then they will go for bed rest. So I thank you so much for highlighting that point on exercise pregnancy.
No problem.
The Kerala Federation have the guideline that Dr. Bina has already mentioned. I'm not going with that.
Yeah.
And hypertension is an important topic just because it is the second most cause of maternal morbidity, perinatal morbidity, and maternal and perinatal morbidity. As we are following the guidelines discussed and by the Kerala, advised by the Kerala Federation under the leadership of Professor Paile, we were able to reduce the incidence of maternal morbidity and mortality to a great level, thanks to Professor Paile. And thanks to Dr. Suresh Kumar for the excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sir, can you elaborate 2 or 3 sentences? What is the type of exercise that you recommend for this antenatal woman for prevention of hypertension?
What we recommend here, they can do light squats, yoga, they can go for a walk, and there are some exercises which we can go online in YouTube's, and they will tell us, in early pregnancy, mid trimester, and then the late trimester, and these exercises do help them during their labor and delivery as well. So here in Malaysia, what we are trying to do, we are advocating, exercises in across the board for everyone. Idea of doing this exercise is not to exert themselves, but to feel good and not to put on more weight. And our weight gain is being maintained by our BMI, and we follow strictly our BMI and advise our patients accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
For the wonderful talk, and thank you, dear madams, for the great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
folks.
very much.